And now, to give a presentation on this theme, I would like to invite Mr. Vijay Mahajan, Secretary and Chief Executive Officer, Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. Mr. Vijay Mahajan is an internationally known Indian rural development professional, social entrepreneur, and a policy analyst. He is the founder of reputed organizations such as Pradhan NGO and the Basic Social Enterprise Group.
I'm really here to put new wine in an old bottle. Normally, it's old wine in a new bottle, but the framework I'm going to use, you'll find it boringly familiar. But I hope what I'm putting in that framework is of some value in thinking about the future. So the framework I'm going to use is this well-known one about the 5 types of capital. And while unfortunately in the early days of development, there was a lot of emphasis on basically starting from the Harrod-Domar model that growth is a function of investment. So whatever the savings in the economy, if they invested, that leads to growth. And it took over 25, 30 years before economists started saying, well, there have to be other dimensions. So Theodor Schultz came up with the idea of human capital, and eventually as the environment got more and more degraded, the value of natural capital was discovered. In between, work of people like Robert Putnam gave us insights into things like social capital. And of course, physical capital is something that we are all obsessed with. Unfortunately, institution building in most situations seems to be building of the institution, the physical building. Nevertheless, this is the framework I think I should use. But one statement I do want to make is that my belief is that we need a balanced development of all these 5 types of capital. And one of the major reasons for the ills of the late 20th and the early 21st century economy is an excessive focus on financial and physical capital, and much to the detriment of natural capital, in some cases also human capital. And because of certain forces of modernization and so forth and technology, a lot of the earlier social capital has got eroded, although it's getting replaced with new types of social capital. But we are living in a very transitional zone. But if you see, unfortunately, financial capital seems to grow exponentially because it has a way of reproducing itself. And physical capital is the easiest manifestation, so it takes over. But the other 3, at least, they are not only not growing, but they are actually getting degraded. So as applied to rural development, just to specify, in natural capital, Jal, Jangal, Zameen, also some people add Janvar and Jalvayu, these 5 J's: water, forest, land, including soil, livestock, and the environment. So human capital starts as early as actually prenatal nutrition for mothers, but also infant nutrition and child nutrition, healthcare all the way throughout the life cycle, but particular emphasis on preventive and primary health. Likewise, education, all levels, but particular emphasis on primary and secondary, and skills to make the human capital participate in the economy. Social capital is the very basis of interaction, and so there we need trust, collaboration, cooperation, and an advanced form of social capital is institutions. I'll talk a bit about that. Physical capital is well known to all of you, I don't need to. And likewise, financial capital. The previous session was dealing a lot with things like access to credit, but there are many other aspects of finance that I'd like to talk about. Natural capital first. We have to recognize that over the last 100 years, we followed a developmental model where we, meaning not just India, the whole world, where our natural resource base has got severely degraded. And nowhere is this more deeply felt than in agriculture, sir. Whether it is groundwater, whether it is surface water, whether it is now due to climate change, changing pattern of rainfall, eroding soil quality, overuse of chemical fertilizers, all of that together has affected productivity and possibilities of further productivity enhancement in agriculture. The answers are well known. There are thousands of small projects around the country, around the world, where we know that we just have to give nature a little rest. All of us saw it during COVID. There was people were able to see, the Himalayan snow mountains from cities like Jalandhar and Saharanpur, which they hadn't seen for 30, 40 years. Rivers got cleaner, the air quality improved, etc., etc. So, that was a immediate reminder that all we have to do is remove the Anthropocene heavy hand, of interference with the environment. It'll bounce back, but it does require some help, and we need to therefore invest in the all-round regeneration of, particularly Jal Jangal Zameen, and I agree with Mr. Sinha when he said that Narega is a very well-honed instrument to do that. I had actually, in a separate paper, which I'll talk about right at the end, done some computations as to how much money is really needed to restore India's degraded natural resources, and adding the three components. And it comes to about 3 lakh crore per annum, which is in the range of 1% of the GDP, and for about 7 years, so we agree on that. So we need about 20 lakh crore, which for us, where the Indian economy today is, lakh crore is a trillion, by the way. So, given the size of the Indian economy, I think we can afford this, provided there is a national sort of recognition of this, then translated into a political mandate. And then I think we are well endowed with a civil service, and both in the center and the states, coupled with technical institutions, civil society institutions, and community-based institutions, which, thanks to all the work that has been done, the SHG movement, the NRLM, and also some watershed and other projects, we have today the institutional basis, the experiential basis, the technical basis to take up a sustained 7-year-long nationwide program to spend 3 lakh crores a year and truly turn around India's Jal Jangal Zameen. And it has two benefits. In the short run, it will generate a large amount of rural employment for unskilled and semi-skilled workers, which is the immediate need. At the same time, we don't want to condemn our population to just doing, earth digging and stuff like that. But over a period of time, as we have seen in lots of watershed projects, as soon as the land and water resources get restored, the productivity that gets unlocked is just amazing. Often there is a doubling, sometimes tripling of the gross output, both in terms of yield, in terms of area under cultivation, in terms of number of crops that can be, the second crop can certainly be taken, sometimes the third crop, and reduction in risk. All these combine together to significantly enhance the output, the rural output, and therefore then incomes and so forth. So, and then that will create the basis for a value-added processing agro-processing economy. And of course, it should be diversified. We should not make the mistake of the green revolution. It was necessary at that time, but it's problematic. We have to learn to go away from at least these three crops: wheat, rice, and sugarcane, which are exceptionally emphasized in the old package. So, likewise, we need to make these investments in degraded forests because that is the real basis for the ecosystem. We need to recently there have been Sinha sir, since you were also in the water resources department, you would certainly know, maybe it was initiated when you were secretary, but two amazing documents have come out in the last 6 months. One is a national plan for groundwater recharge, aquifer by aquifer. It is really a detailed document. It's a plan, but you know, it's really quite amazing that CW, Central Groundwater Board, has done that. And about a month ago, I saw that there's been a census of water bodies, and about 2.5 million water bodies have been identified. That census is the first of its kind, so more data of various kinds will be required. But I was just trying to do a thought exercise where if we overlaid these two using GIS tools and so forth, we could actually do surface water conservation structure locational planning so that it maximizes groundwater recharge. And I've seen examples of both kinds where surface water structures were made where it was most appropriate for surface water, but it does nothing for aquifers which are just half a kilometer away because no channel was built. And I've seen conjunctive planning where it makes a huge difference. So, Chand Sahab, in case this is an idea that you could look at, it would be very useful. Soil particularly requires a lot more attention because of its reduction, its emphasis on agriculture production. Human capital, I know Mr. Amarjit Sinha spoke a lot about it. He's had an amazing career. He was Joint Secretary Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, then he was Joint Secretary National Rural Health Mission, and before he retired, he was Secretary Rural Development. So every time I meet Amarjit, I say, what a career, health, education, and rural development, all at the cutting edge. And that's why I logged into his presentation. And I know he presented a lot more data, but I just want to emphasize that, it's not as if the nation is not aware of this or that we have not done anything about it. In fact, we have very large programs for all these things with very large public expenditure. But one very critical assumption has gone wrong. Because something requires public expenditure, should it be implemented entirely by the public bureaucracy, right down to a school teacher, right down to an Anganwadi worker, right down to that is where I think we've gone wrong. The ethos, unfortunately, of public service workers, particularly at the lower level, particularly in the poorer states. And while there are some stars, some of my most favorite people are school teachers, government school teachers, Anganwadi workers who during COVID they did so much. But on the whole, the return to the nation in investment in these programs is less than commensurate to the investments. And the primary reason is the public service ethos has not got built, and that's partly because we have kept one system too long, which is, despite having some of the greatest people as civil servants in our country, really dedicated, brilliant, everything. But we have, as a result, not built adequate capacity nor given adequate roles to the panchayats and the Zilla Parishads. And as a result of which, the whole system is still, the village level workers of all these programs still look up to their departmental heads and the departmental secretary as their boss, and don't particularly care about the sarpanch or even the Zilla Parishad chairman. There are some local political heavyweights, but generally speaking, systemically, this is a flaw that really needs to be corrected before we can put more money. Otherwise, I would say we should not put more money. As citizens, we should demand higher returns on public expenditure, and the reasons why it has not so happened, and the reasons that I've given are some of those. Coming to social capital, we really need to not just invest, but unfortunately, for various reasons, there's been a decline actually in the Hindi word for it is sadbhavana, mutuality, sense of goodwill for each other. We need to rebuild that. We need to rebuild trust. All literature in institutional development anywhere tells you that unless these building blocks are there, you can have any quality of human capital, you can dump any amount of financial capital, but you will not have developmental outcomes commensurate with that unless the people learn to work together. And for that, a sense of mutuality, trust, ability to collaborate, and eventually engage in community or collective action, and eventually to manage permanent local institutions like panchayats, Zilla Parishads, self-help group federations, primary agriculture cooperative societies. All of that depends on, that's all part of social capital. We unfortunately have had a lot of difficult setbacks, and the cooperative sector of the country, which is over 100 years old, the first co-ops were in 1904, is a case history of how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and there has been extreme, in the name of giving it greater strength, there has been extreme interference both by the bureaucracy and by the political executive in the nation's cooperative sector. And this is in spite of the fact that the 95th or 97th Amendment has actually enshrined autonomy of cooperatives into the Constitution. But despite that, but we have a contrary and an outstanding example. All of you are very familiar with it, the self-help group movement. Parmesh and I were lucky enough, C.S. Reddy just left. Some of us have seen it literally from the first day to where it is today. It's unbelievable that we have over maybe some 1.2 crore self-help groups in the country. You know all the numbers, and they keep growing, so there's no point repeating them. But it's something we can be proud of. It's absolutely world-class. But once again, we're beginning to see the self-help group movement, instead of being seen as the first step in the ladder of people's participation or women's empowerment, it's beginning to be seen as the last link in the chain of distribution of government benefits and schemes. And it's the same, but it's how you see it. And the more you use it as a distribution chain last link, the more it will get degraded, and I don't want that one day all the great work that has been done should then go the way the cooperative sector went. Although there are, even again in the cooperative sector, there are some outstanding examples. We all know about the Amul chain and all of that, but by and large, it's not been a happy experience. Likewise, this is the 30th year of the 73rd Amendment, which brought in, the Panchayati Raj institutions, the Zilla Parishads. Last year we did a full nationwide review of what is the status, and like so many other things in India, you can be proud of a lot that has happened compared to 30 years ago. And yet we have such a long way to go compared to what were the stated objectives, that you feel that this still needs to be fixed. And one thing I do want to appeal, although there's no political people here, but maybe in whatever way, we have to look at these as national problems. It's not a problem of the BJP today because it's in power, or another party tomorrow because that will come in power. These issues of unemployment, of livelihoods, environmental degradation, institutional dysfunction are national problems. We have to get together as Indians to crack these. And I guarantee you that we have the experience, the technical capabilities, the institutions, and now also finally the size of the economy to be able to crack these. We just need to get that political consensus to crack these as a national problem and not as this or that one's problem. Physical capital, the main thing that I want to emphasize is in the second bullet point, which is, when we list, ye bhi chahiye, we need this, we need this, we need this, and then who will finance it? Oh, the government should finance it. It's time we went away from this last sentence in our wish list. The government, all said and done, for all its size and power in India, is only 15% of the GDP. And of that, the committed budget, depending on which state you're talking about, can be 70, 80%. So the developmental options of the government are 3 or 4% of the GDP, totally. The real wealth of India is not with the government. But we citizens and we policy wonks need to actually wake up to that and start, thinking in terms of that. I want to mention that when Mr. K. Raju was still in Andhra Pradesh, he was the district collector of Karnool, and I used to work around the corner. We conducted a census of defunct infrastructure. I think it's the only census of defunct infrastructure. We found to our horror that there were many, many places where the same thing had been built twice or sometimes 3 times, and even the third version was lying defunct. Lift irrigation schemes, community centers, all kinds of things. So we need a national mission to revive the defunct infrastructure. If this is Amrit Kal, then first thing on which we should sprinkle Amrit is the defunct infrastructure, and it's a significant part of the GDP, I can assure you. So much of infrastructure is just lying defunct. We need to, and it will yield the most fantastic incremental capital output ratio, because 90% of the capital is already invested. When at the end of that project, we revived some 90 defunct lift irrigation schemes on the banks of the Krishna River, with investments as small as 2 lakhs, this is in the late 90s, as small as 2 lakhs for lift irrigation schemes which had originally cost at that time 1.5 crores. With 2 lakh rupee investment, it got revived and the returns were just fantastic. And we as an MFI gave loans for that 2 lakhs, so it was not government budget. So it's possible to do this. But let me just come to my last point about financial capital. So the point I was making was that this line item called government expenditure is very small part of the GDP, and it's overburdened. We don't want to raise the tax to GDP ratio for whatever reasons, but at the same time, we want to keep taxing the government. Ki ye bhi kar do, do this, do this, do this. It's not right. The real wealth of the nation is not in the government treasury, it's in the bank accounts. And increasingly also in insurance and pension savings, mutual funds, the share market and so forth. But basically, a lot of the wealth of the nation is in the hands of private citizens. And we need to figure out an efficient and effective way to put that at the service of the nation. One can say, you're not saying anything new. Indira Gandhi nationalized banks in 1970 with this objective. Yes, it's true, and our insurance sector was nationalized even earlier and has been so for a long time. But the fact is that despite 70% of financial sector assets being in the private sector, in the public sector, the Indian financial sector has become basically a big machine to draw small savings from economically backward regions and funnel it as large credit and investments to the economically forward areas. Bihar has had, and North Bihar has had a CD, credit deposit ratio, in the low 30s since one ever looked at those numbers. Even today, it's rarely above 40%. You go to Tamil Nadu or Western Maharashtra, you'll find districts where the CD ratio is 110%. Now, one can say, hey, be thankful. If Bihar can't create the environment to absorb its own surpluses, at least people have the ability to put it in state bank branch and the money remains safe and they get some return. I would buy this argument if it was given to me in 1972, maybe even 1982, maybe till 1992. It's been 50 years since we nationalized our banking system. It's been 65 years since we nationalized our insurance system. And we are claiming that our financial sector still, you heard the discussion in the previous session. We're still talking about the fact that our banks are not ready to really serve the vast majority of 6.3 crore MSMEs and other things. And yet, we've seen a success in that. The self-help group movement, starting from women's own savings and then the bank linkage program, has been a grand success. Mr. Sinha yesterday quoted the number of some 6.3 lakh crores. This cumulative lending last year, and microfinances somewhere nearby also. These two examples show you that there is tremendous ability and appetite for use of financial capital at the base of the pyramid. And that is the way by which people become self-reliant, autonomous, and don't make a big hole in the fiscal deficit of the state or the nation. So we need to therefore go away from government expenditure to increasingly bank credit. There are reasons where banks loans maybe initially have to be provided some guarantee and maybe some interest subvention, but we got to have a movement, a national movement by citizens to say, hey, Mr. Financial Sector, you have to serve everybody in India, not just South Bombay. People of Bihar or the Northeast or Madhya Pradesh are not saving in the Indian banking system just so that all the money can go to Bombay and be used by just the top 2, 3, 5% of the economy. So we've got to, but apart from that, there are certain new uses, particularly when I talked about Jal Jangal Zameen. Unfortunately, those things require investments, but they can't be financed through normal bank credit because the durations are long, there's no natural thing called an enterprise, there's no, it's very hard to figure out how to get a repayment. So there we need other types of finance, and new types of finance have started coming up. Climate and carbon finance. India is beginning to get something from GEF, but we need to really build this. I'm very glad to know that the RBI has now got a working group on green finance. But we also need to blend in some social capital. There has been the establishment of the social stock exchange, which brings some of the impact financing closer to the financial sector. So, and then eventually, of course, private investments. And one sector where we saw that transition was infrastructure. 30 years ago, if I told you a road should be built with private finance, people would laugh or look at me as if I'm from Mars. But it started, starting with the Indore-Devas road or the Jaipur-Kishangarh road and so forth, small things. From there all the way to, infrastructure financing. There are two people here who headed large infrastructure companies, It's unbelievable the institutional innovation that has been made in the infrastructure sector so that today a significant single-digit percentage of the GDP is available as infrastructure finance. We need to do the same for natural capital finance. The same amount of intellectual and institutional development work needs to be done so that no questions asked, 1 lakh crore a year would be available for private investments in natural capital regeneration. Coupled with, of course, some social capital and some community capital. These together, according to me, form the agenda of the future of rural development. This sounds awfully capitalistic, but as you can see, it's not only financial capital. And the fact that I'm emphasizing human capital and social capital and saying that those are the building blocks of true all-round balanced development indicates that I'm not talking about a neoliberal model. Please don't just go away with the fact that I've used the word capital 20 times. It is being used in a generic sense, and we need to start thinking in a manner where the first law is, just as the Hippocratic oath is for doctors, thou shalt do no harm, we should have a pledge, thou shalt not suggest a program which does not generate an economic surplus and does not build social capital, and does not destroy natural capital. If these three are fulfilled as our oath, then we policy wonks would have made a contribution to India 2047. Thank you very much. By the way, that last slide was reference to a book called, published by Springer Verlag, where there's a article that I wrote with a lot of numbers and so forth. So if you were interested in pursuing this, some of these arguments to the next level of detail, it's there. So thank you.